When we make excuses for evil around us because of the potential for good towards us, we compromise everything that's significant about us. What if there's something better than the thing you want the most? What if? What if there's something better than the thing you want the most? If you got a Bible today, go ahead and grab it. Meet me in Judges chapter 9. Judges chapter 9 for week 5 in a series we've called Wax Museum Saviors, where we're looking through the book of Judges, which we said is really a lot like a wax museum. If you just look at it from a distance, which is the way that most of us only ever look at the book of Judges, especially if you grew up in church, it appears to be a collection of some of the greatest leaders of all time in some of their defining moments. Leaders like Samson, or Gideon, that we talk about as children. And yet we've said if you begin to look a little closer, you begin to realize, much like going into a wax museum, that the leaders in front of you, even those leaders, aren't nearly the leaders that we imagined as children. Really, that's the whole point of the book of Judges. The point of the book of Judges is not to hold up a leader or hold up a hero or a series of heroes. It's to hold up a mirror and to show us some of the characteristics that we tend to want to imitate as leaders or elevate in our leaders, and to show us that those characteristics often don't lead us in the direction that we thought they would take us. And ultimately, the point of the book of Judges is to point us to a truer, better hero that's right there the whole time. That may be especially true of the leader that we're looking at today, who's a leader you may not have ever heard of. And yet the point of his story turns out to be the point of the whole book. Let me give you a running start to it. Last week, if you were here, we talked about the book, the leader named Gideon. And Jay showed us that Gideon's one of those leaders that seems to oscillate his whole life between insecurity and overconfidence. He's either the model of extreme faithfulness or the model of the opposite of that, whatever that is. And perhaps that's not any better picture than at the very end of his life, the last couple of verses about his story, as he's nearing the end of his life, there's one sentence that you get both ends of the spectrum out of Gideon. On one half, when you get to the end of chapter 8, the people come to him and say, hey, things are going so well for us. We want to make this into a dynasty. We want to elevate you, and we want you to be our king. And then after you, your son can be the king. And after him, your grandson can be the king, because things are going so well, we don't ever want it to end. So we want you to be our king and start a dynasty. And Gideon stands forward and says, I'm not going to be your king. I'm not going to rule over you. My son is not going to be your king. My grandson is not going to be your king. Look, the Lord should be your leader. Extreme humility, great leadership out of him. But in the second half of the sentence, he says, but you know, if you've each got a gold earring, I'd take that. And he takes their gold earrings and he melts them down and he creates a symbol of God that's made to represent God, but ultimately becomes a replacement for God. And it leads him astray, and the people follow him as they all go astray together. It leads them back into that cycle. In fact, the very last verse on his legacy says the people followed Gideon, and Gideon led them astray. And before his body was even cold, the narrator of the book of Judges tells us, the people had forgotten all about Gideon, and they'd forgotten all about his God. They're back into the start of this cycle that we've seen they keep going back into over and over and over in the book of Judges. In fact, 7 times in the book, they go through this cycle. God puts them in a land and he gives them their promise, and they rebel against him. And then he sends resistance into their life, and they call out for rescue, and he restores them. And then they relax, and they rebel once again. 7 different times it happens throughout the book of Judges. Unless we be a little too hard on the people of Israel for their participation in that cycle, that pattern of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Happens 7 times in the book of Judges for them. How many times does it happen every day for you? The cycle happens a lot for me. It happens for them, especially in my relationship with God. It's where we're at in their story. They're at the beginning of the cycle again. End of chapter 8 tells us that Gideon fathered 70 sons, 70, with multiple wives. Just so you're aware, right from the very beginning of the biblical narrative, God defines marriage as one man, one woman for life. It describes several different times throughout the Bible that people depart from that pattern. When it describes it, it never prescribes it. In fact, every time you see that kind of thing happen, it's like a blinking red light saying, warning, things are about to go terribly wrong. And they do go terribly wrong. Gideon had multiple wives, 70 sons, at least one son who was born outside of even that great big happy family arrangement. A son named Abimelech. Abimelech was the son of a concubine. We pick up his story in Judges chapter 9, beginning in verse 1. It says this, Abimelech, son of Jerubbaal, that's another name for Gideon, it means fights with Baal, went to his mother's brothers in Shechem and said to them and to all his mother's clan, ask all the citizens of Shechem, pay attention to this question, which is better for you? To have all 70 of Jerubbaal's sons rule over you, or just one man? Remember, I'm your flesh and blood. Abimelech says, hey guys, remember all of that momentum behind making dad the beginning of a dynasty? Remember how things were going back then and how great we all felt about the direction of the nation and the way that everything was going? How we wanted dad to start a dynasty and we were going to elevate one of his sons, and dad said no. Things are starting to get sketchy again with nobody to lead us. And before long, people are going to remember back to how things were when dad was in power. They're going to think back about the good old days. And they're going to remember what they wanted the most back then. And they're going to realize that would have been better. And they're going to go look for someone to rule them. They're going to look for someone to continue the dynasty, look for one of those sons to get things back the way things used to be. And there are 70 guys out there with a claim to that dynasty. And let's be honest, because of circumstances outside of my control, I'm going to be the last one on the list. Unless we grab a hold of that narrative. Look, Abimelech says, I'm one of you. The other 70, whether just one of them or a whole committee of them, the cronyism, the nepotism that's going to bring, that thing's going to be a political swamp. Unless you elevate someone who's not a part of that to lead you. Look at verse 3. When the brothers repeated all this to the citizens of Shechem, they were inclined to follow Abimelech. For they said, he is related to us. Remember this refrain that keeps coming up all the way through the book of Judges? Every man did what was right in his own eyes. That's what they do. They follow their hearts. And they ask the question, which is better for us? But they're about to discover what's best for us is not always what appears best for us in the moment. It's the ancient world, so they know what it means when they decide to elevate Abimelech. It means that 70 brothers are going to have to swim with the fishes. So they go to their pagan temple and they borrow from the offering plates so that Abimelech can have some goons hired to make all of that happen. The passage goes on to tell us that he goes out and finds people who the passage calls reckless scoundrels. Actually, maybe a better translation for that would be reckless adventurers. Guys who are in it for the excitement. Guys who are in it for the drama more than they really care about the cause at all. You know people like that? You know people like that if you're on social media. They're everywhere on social media. The people just want to be where the action is. They masquerade as justice fighters. They're present on every side of an issue. But if you pay attention, you begin to discover they enjoy the fight more than they care about the cause. They're like the hyenas in The Lion King. They start to orbit around Scar, not because they believe in him as a leader, because they're bored. They're looking for some action. These reckless scoundrels in Judges chapter 9, they get a shekel of silver each for each of the sons that they kill. 70 shekels of silver as blood money. And one by one, they bring 69 of Gideon's sons out. One of them escapes, but the others, they kill one by one. And what seems like a really creepy satanic ritual, they slay them all on the same stone. And then look at verse 6. Then all the citizens of Shechem and Bet Millo gathered beside the great tree at the pillar in Shechem to crown Abimelech king. And that's the line in the story. When young Israelite fathers and young Israelite mothers retold this story to their young Israelite children, that the young Israelite children gasped. There, by the pillar under the great tree at Shechem. That would be like inaugurating a pro-slavery president in a ceremony on the battlefield at Gettysburg. It would be like signing over control of Texas to Mexico and holding the ceremony at the Alamo. Way back in Genesis chapter 12, when God made a covenant with Abram, he promised, I'm going to make you great and your people great, and I'm going to give you a land. I'm going to give you a seed, and I'm going to give you a blessing and make you a blessing. Do you remember where that took place? Genesis 12 tells us, under the great tree in Shechem. Shechem was the place that Jacob lived with his 12 sons. Shechem was the place that Joseph's bones were buried after his leadership in Egypt. But on this day, the great tree at Shechem was the location where a crowd gathers to crown a power-hungry murderer their king, because they're totally certain that after all of the murdering and evil is out of the way, this populist king who represents them will give them exactly what they want the most right now. This is a king who's going to make Israel great again. This is a king who's going to build Israel back better. In fact, just before I get any further into this, let me say out loud what some of you are going to start to wonder. Gosh, it seems like he's talking about that populist king, but maybe he thinks there's a line to another king. Maybe there's a line from this story to a former leader of ours, or a current leader of ours. Let me just say explicitly, I absolutely think there's a line there. But not just to one of those leaders, to all of them. And not really just to the leader. I think there's a straight line to us. It's really what I think Judges chapter 9 is trying to show us. When we make excuses for evil around us, because of the potential for good towards us, we compromise everything that's significant about us. Let me say that again because I think it's really, really important. On a big scale, Republicans, Democrats, all the way down to our kids' Little League baseball teams, the conversations we have with neighbors in our front yard, when we make excuses for evil around us, because of the potential for good towards us, we compromise everything that's significant about us. And we're going to see that play out. These people are standing in the spot where God said, I will be your God, and you will be my people. I will bless you and the nations through you. But in clear, overt ways, these people said, we'll take all that blessing, but we don't need you to give it. We'll grab it on our own. And they grabbed something that all along God had been willing to give. Keep reading. Look what happens. Verse 7, when Jotham was told, Jotham's the son of Gideon who escaped Abimelech's thugs. When Jotham was told about this, he climbed to the top of Mount Gerizim and he shouted to them, listen to me, citizens of Shechem, so that God may listen to you. And then he tells them a parable. A parable is a story that's designed to make a point, and to make a point stick so you can't ever forget it, to make the point permanent. And if you want to be prepared for Bible Trivial Pursuit, Jesus used parables a lot. This is the very first parable in the whole Bible. Jotham tells it, Judges chapter 9. He says this, one day, the trees went out to anoint a king for themselves. They said to the olive tree, be our king. So that imagery is important all throughout history. Olive tree, if you've ever seen one, is known for its sturdiness and for its abundance. It pictures extravagance and consumption, wealth and riches and security. Think economy. Jotham says as he looks around at the trees, all of the trees look around and say, that's what we want the most right now. We want a strong, sturdy economy. We want to be rich. We want to be wealthy. We want to be prosperous. We want to experience abundance no matter what. Who could we raise up that would give us that? And they look around and see the olive tree and say, he could. The olive tree stands for materialism and wealth. But look what the olive tree says to all of the kingdom of trees, verse 9. The olive tree answered, should I give up my oil, by which both gods and humans are honored, to hold sway over the trees? The olive tree says, if nominated, I will not run. If elected, I will not serve. What I want the most, the olive tree says, is wealth, riches, materialism. And I've got it. And if I try to go get it for you, I'll have to give it up for me. No thanks. I'm out. Find somebody else. The olive tree says, I won't be your king. So they go find somebody else. Verse 10. Next, the tree said to the fig tree, come be our king. But the fig tree replied, should I give up my fruit, so good and sweet, to hold sway over the trees? All throughout the Jewish scriptures, the fig tree is a picture of security and peace. It's one of the promises of God. You see it show up over and over. One of the promises in the new heavens and the new earth, the kingdom where Jesus rules, is that each man will sit under his own fig tree. You get the idea of a permanent vacation when you think about the fig tree. Nothing to chase and nothing chasing you. Toes in the water, drink in your hand. Life is good today. That's the fig tree. People say that's really what we want right now. More than anything else. We don't have to have wealth. We don't have to have prosperity. We don't have to have a great economy. If we could just have security and peace and quiet. Large scale and small scale. Secure borders, fewer deadlines. That's the fig tree. Safety, security, and peace. But the fig tree says, why would I sacrifice my peace for yours? I mean, I'm doing good over here. Sounds like a lot of work to lead you, and it might not always be safe. I think I'm good. Find somebody else. Verse 12, then the tree said to the vine, come be our king. But the vine answered, should I give up my wine, which cheers both gods and humans to hold sway over the trees? The vine represents pleasures and happiness all throughout the scripture. Joy and cheer and pleasures and happiness get pictured by the fruit of the vine. And the people say, the olive tree didn't work out for us. The fig tree, it didn't work either. But really, we don't need wealth or security, strong borders, permanent vacation. If we could just make it fun. As long as life is enjoyable, that's all we really want. Life can be pleasurable. That's all we're really after. It's what we want the most, at least right now. So they ask the vine. The vine says, yeah, I could do it. But if all you people show up to my party, you're going to crash my party. It's not going to be that fun for me anymore. Keep looking. Hope you find who you're looking for. Verse 14, finally, all the trees said to the thorn bush, come be our king. Wait, hang on. The thorn bush? The trees want to be ruled by a thorn bush? Okay, notice this move in the parable is really, really important. It's designed to get you to ask a question. And if you rush past the question and don't ask it, you'll miss the point of the whole parable. Olive tree, to fig tree, to grapevine, to thorn bush? What's the question? Thorn bush? Isn't there someone better to follow than the thorn bush? Why does that matter? Remember, that's the question of the whole book. Starts at the very beginning. Who are we going to trust to lead our lives? And yet you notice the direction that the people of God continue to go. Start with the olive tree. The olive tree won't do it. Well, what's the next worst? The fig tree. No? No to the fig tree? Okay, what's the next worst after that? The grapevine. Next worst after that. They keep lowering their standards over and over and over because they're focused on what's the best available right this second. While the answer to their question, who should we trust to lead our life? The solution to their problem, the point of the parable is right there in front of them. Where? Under the great tree at Shechem, where it's been for a few hundred years. Under that tree, God promised, I'll secure your land. Trust me. Under that tree, God promised, I'll provide you rest. Trust me. Under that tree, God said, I'll give you so much blessing, it will fill you up and overflow out of you and spread to the ends of the earth. All I'm asking is for you to trust me and let me lead your life. And over, the people of Israel and people like you and me say, man, I don't really need all of it, at least not right now. And I sure don't want to wait on you for it. So give me the least worst option that gives me a chance at what I want the most right this second. And God's saying to his people, and he's saying to you and me, what if there's something better than the thing you want the most right this second? Doesn't mean we don't elevate imperfect leaders or even vote for imperfect human leaders. But it means we don't tie our trust. It means we don't tie our hopes and our dreams and our futures and our reputations to the least worst option available. And we sure don't follow them into their folly because there's a better leader to follow. And the least worst leader will never take you where you're wanting to go. That's where Abimelech's story goes. Jotham makes the point and then gets out of town. Look what happens, verse 21. Jotham fled, escaping to Beer. Now I have some of your attention. What's that Beer verse again? Beer means well. It's even better, right? Where are we going for family vacation? Let's go to the beer well for vacation. That's where he escapes. Jotham fled, escaping to Beer, and he lived there because he was afraid of his brother Abimelech. After Abimelech had governed, which is actually, there's a stronger Hebrew word than just the word governed. It's actually ruled over them as a tyrant. After Abimelech had ruled over them as a tyrant for 3 years, God stirred up animosity between Abimelech and the citizens of Shechem so that they acted treacherously against Abimelech. The people of Israel shocked by what all of us see coming. The power-hungry tyrant didn't stop being hungry when he had power. Shocking. And then Abimelech's shocked by what we all see coming. We see it happen in political leaders. We see it happen in military leaders throughout all of history. We see it happen with bosses, with politicians, with pastors, seminary professors and presidents, and coaches and activists all over the news, even just over the past few years. Ruling like a tyrant is like plugging up a dam with your finger and toes. It works as long as nothing gets through, and as long as you have enough fingers and toes. But as soon as the first leak in the power gets exposed, the whole thing always comes crashing down. That's where this story goes. You can read through it this week. The people who raised up Abimelech realize that he's no longer what they want the most. And they move on to something and someone else, and they hatch a plan to take him out. The same people that turned public opinion for him turn public opinion against him. And Abimelech responds the way he's always responded, trying to grab power and hang on to whatever power he's got, whatever the cost to anyone else. He destroys everything that stands in the way. His own people find themselves fleeing from the king they chose, seeking safety in the only place they can find it. And in some irony of the parable, the tumbleweed king gathers together some thorn bushes and uses them as kindling to burn down the symbol of safety and security and peace and prosperity in his own city. And 1,000 of his own people are killed, destroyed by the hand of the person that they trusted to bring them what they wanted the most. And it only emboldens Abimelech. In fact, he moves on to the next town and he attempts to do the same thing again. Look at verse 52. Abimelech went to the tower and attacked it. But as he approached the entrance to the tower to set it on fire, a woman dropped an upper millstone on his head and cracked his skull. The one who had killed 70 sons on a stone is destroyed by a stone. Hurriedly, he called to his armor bearer, "Draw your sword and kill me so that they can't say a woman killed him." A man who's desperate to stay in power, a man who's desperate to stay in control, stays desperate to stay in power and control even in the way that he dies. So his servant ran him through and he dies. When the Israelites saw that Abimelech was dead, they went home. It's almost startling how abruptly it ends, isn't it? When the Israelites saw that Abimelech was dead, they went home. Went home to do what? Pick up the pieces. Rebuild their lives. And ultimately start the same cycle again. The big point of the story almost seems too obvious to make. It's a story of a God that says you can trust someone else to lead your life. You can trust a philosophy. You can trust a politician. You can set your heart on a different religion or chase down whatever's in front of you right this second, whatever you want the most today. And I'm just telling you, it always ends in destruction. And all the while, God says, I want better for you than that. I want better for the people around you than for you to destroy yourselves and destroy each other trying to grab gifts that I'm willing to give. See, the story of Abimelech's destruction isn't a threat. It's an invitation. It's an invitation to ask a better question. To see where the Israelites should have been looking all along. And to choose a different path for your life. Rather than looking to the olive tree, or the fig tree, or the grapevine, or the thorn bush, to look to a different tree. To the God who's been present all along. Patiently. Simply saying, trust me. The olive tree said, I'm not giving up my riches to help you find yours. Jesus said, I will. The fig tree said, Why would I give up my rest to help you find rest? And Jesus said, I will. The grapevine says pleasures and happiness and fullness of joy. If I give it, there'll be less for me. But Jesus says, I'll pour out my blood so that you can have the promise of new wine and forever joy. Hear it. Don't just look for the least worst tree. It's right here in front of you. Look for a better tree. The scriptures say, cursed is every man who hangs on a tree. And Jesus said, I'll take it. How could you tie your trust or your hopes or your dreams or your future or your reputation to any other tree? How could you look to anyone else to lead you? When Jesus says, I'll bring you all of it, blessing, security, rest, joy, hope, a future, and life that's truly life. And it may not come like you expected. It may not look like it would look if you were leading the way. But come on, let's be honest. Look at that story. Look at your story, where things that we lead tend to always go. When we chase what we want the most right this second, where that road always takes us, and where that road always leaves us. Jesus says, trust me. Look to me to lead your life. I've been here all along, just waiting for you to ask the question. And I promise, in me, you'll find something better than whatever it is you want the most right now. Would you bow your head with me? If this morning you've come to this moment and realized you've trusted a lot of people to lead your life. Maybe you've spent your whole life chasing whatever you want the most right this second, trying to grab the gifts that God wants to give, and there's never been a moment in your life where you said, I want to trust in him to lead me. This can be that moment for you. It's as simple as right where you're sitting in the privacy of your heart, saying, Jesus, I'll trust you. I believe that you gave up your security and the security of heaven to come here and die on a cross. That you gave up your rest to come here and do the work that I couldn't do or wouldn't do. And that you rose from the dead to give me life and hope forever and a future. Forgiveness of sins, and I'll receive it right now. And I want to look to you to lead me from here on. How could I not when I see who you are? Father in heaven, for those who are receiving that gift in this moment, I pray that you give them the courage to tell someone. And for some of us who are reflecting on the moment where we put our trust in you for everlasting life, Lord, would you let us be people who trust you for everyday life, to not tie our future or our hope, our dreams to the thing that we just want the most right now, and to never anchor it in a leader, no matter how great, except to anchor it to you and to follow you where you lead us. Would you let us live like people who let you lead our life from here, wherever you're sending us from here? We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Hey, thanks for watching. If something you heard resonated with you today, we would love to connect with you. Visit doxology.church/connect or leave a comment below. And if you enjoyed today's message and you want to see more, make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new videos.